Hello crafters, welcome back to the Code Crafters. In today's video, we're going to explore some cool star patterns using nested for loops in C++. We'll learn how to print different star shapes and patterns, which are great exercises for understanding loops and logic in programming. So, let's dive right into it. Before we start, let's quickly refresh what nested loops are. A nested loop is simply one loop inside another. The outer loop controls the rows, and the inner loop controls the elements or characters inside each row. We will be using these loops to print star patterns. Let's start with the right-angled triangle pattern. In this pattern, the number of stars increases as we move down each row. In this code, there are two nested loops that work together to print a pattern of stars. The outer loop runs n times, which is 5 in this case, and for each iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop prints stars. Let's break down the execution with a detailed explanation for 3 iterations. Initialization. N is set to 5, which means the outer loop will run 5 times, and for each iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop will print a number of stars corresponding to the current iteration of the outer loop. Iteration 1. Outer loop, I equals 1. The inner loop runs from j equals 1 to j equals 1, printing 1 star. After the inner loop finishes, the outer loop moves to the next iteration, printing a new line. Iteration 2. Outer loop, I equals 2. The inner loop runs from j equals 1 to j equals 2, printing 2 stars. After the inner loop finishes, the outer loop moves to the next iteration, printing a new line. Iteration 3. Outer loop, I equals 3. The inner loop runs from j equals 1 to j equals 3, printing 3 stars. After the inner loop finishes, the outer loop moves to the next iteration, printing a new line. In each iteration of the outer loop, the number of stars printed increases by 1. The inner loop is responsible for printing the stars, and the number of iterations of the inner loop is determined by the current value of the outer loop, I. The result is a triangle-shaped pattern of stars, with the first row containing 1 star, the second row containing 2 stars, and so on. After the inner loop runs for each I, a new line is printed to start the next row. After successful execution, output will be like this. This program uses nested loops to print an inverted triangle pattern of stars. The outer loop controls the rows, and the inner loop controls the number of stars printed in each row. Let's explain the behavior in detail for the first 3 iterations. Initialization. The variable n is set to 5, so the outer loop starts with I equals n, 5, and decreases by 1 in each iteration until I equals 1. For each iteration of the outer loop, the inner loop runs from j equals 1 to j equals I, printing I stars in that row. Iteration 1, outer loop, I equals 5. The outer loop begins with I equals 5. The inner loop starts with j equals 1 and runs until j equals 5, inclusive, printing 5 stars. After the inner loop finishes, the outer loop moves to the next iteration and prints a new line to start the next row. Iteration 2, outer loop, I equals 4. The outer loop now has I equals 4. The inner loop starts with j equals 1 and runs until j equals 4, printing 4 stars. After the inner loop finishes, the outer loop moves to the next iteration and prints a new line. Iteration 3, outer loop, I equals 3. The outer loop now has I equals 3. The inner loop starts with j equals 1 and runs until j equals 3, printing 3 stars. After the inner loop finishes, the outer loop moves to the next iteration and prints a new line. After successful execution, output will be like this. This program prints a pyramid pattern of stars by using 3 nested loops within a single outer loop. The outer loop determines the row number, while the nested loops handle spaces and stars for each row. Let's explain the code step by step for the first 3 iterations of the outer loop. Code structure. The outer loop controls the row number. The value of I determines these. The number of spaces, j loop. The number of stars, K loop. After each row, a new line, C out and L is added. First inner loop. Prints spaces to align the stars in a pyramid shape. The number of spaces decreases as I increases. Second inner loop. Prints stars, asterisk, to form the pyramid shape. The number of stars increases in odd increments as I increases. 3 iterations explained. First iteration, I equals 1. First inner loop, spaces. J runs from 1 to 4, I equals 1, N equals 5, so 4 spaces are printed. Second inner loop, stars. K runs from 1 to 1, 2 times 1 minus 1, so 1 star is printed. Second iteration, I equals 2. First inner loop, spaces. J runs from 2 to 4, I equals 2, N equals 5, so 3 spaces are printed. Second inner loop, stars. K runs from 1 to 3, 2 times 2 minus 1, so 3 stars are printed. Third iteration, I equals 3. First inner loop, spaces. J runs from 3 to 4, I equals 3, N equals 5, so 2 spaces are printed. Second inner loop, stars. K runs from 1 to 5, 2 times 3 minus 1, so 5 stars are printed. Outer loop, I determines the row. First inner loop, J decreases the number of spaces as rows increase. Second inner loop, K increases the number of stars in an odd sequence 1, 3, 5, and so on. Thank you and happy coding.